Hi guys, I'm Shmee, hello to you, welcome back to the channel and welcome today to a return of my Fuel for Thought video series. The FFT videos are back. Now if you're not familiar with these, it's where we pick a topic and discuss it in more detail about the supercar world from my experiences, the cars I get to drive and what it's like in some cases to own some of these cars, in particular what we're going to be talking about today. So before now, for example, we've discussed buying your first supercar. We've talked about having a supercar collection versus running a single hypercar. We've also discussed the process to secure allocations on the limited edition versions of cars. But today, in response to a lot of the driving that I've been doing recently, I'd like to talk about what it costs to daily drive a supercar. So for example, in my AMG GT R that is literally right now 6 months old, I have already done 10,000 miles. That's about 16,000 kilometers. In this car, the 911 GT3, which is about 5 weeks now since I drove it for the first time, it has just shy of 4,000 miles on the dashboard, 6,000 kilometers. I don't think anybody can call these two cars garage queens at all. So let's talk a little bit more now about some of the costs behind that. The fuel, for example, that I've used in them, the storage, the insurance, the transport. You know already a little bit because we've talked about it, about the buying decisions, financing, how you secure the best deal, the depreciation of the cars, and obviously there's a lot more to the specific cars I have in my garage. For example, it kind of splits two ways. On one hand, we have the McLaren 675 LT Spider and the Aston Martin Vantage GT8, which are cars that you see that I still use very regularly. For example, on the Ringwing Ting, we took them around the Nürburgring GP, around the Nordschleife, drove them from London via Paris to even get to the ring. So even though they're cars that might not be at the forefront of my content, they're not going anywhere in a hurry, they're still being used. But those slightly different perspective to their costs behind them. The AMG GT R and the 911 GT3, even though we've not had necessarily the best weather, are very, very quickly clocking up the miles. Now the thing you might notice is that I'm currently sat in the GT3, my only left-hand drive car, in London, the right-hand drive country. Now the reason behind that is because I've driven it here via Brussels to bring the GT8 home, bring the GT3 over as well, but also for a few things while I'm here, as well as letting my dad take the car out for a bit, and he's going to take it on a road trip to bring it back towards Frankfurt eventually. But while we're sitting in the car, let us just start it up. And I can tell you, this is going to bring up one thing to talk about: minimum oil level reached. Now that's not actually a problem. If you run the oil measurement, it just tells you to top it up a little bit and it's still okay to drive. So obviously I will top it up before we head off on a significant driving adventure, but that's just one of the things you have to think about in these kind of cars. It's not so simple as just going from service to service. So the cost behind them, before we go anywhere, let me just bring up on my display here while we're still in the car park some of the costs. So the AMG GT R in 10,000 miles has averaged 17.3 miles per gallon. Now that means I have used 2,628 litres of fuel at a cost of £3,700 in 6 months. And I'm not going to lie, that is terrifying. However, I've travelled a lot, obviously, to get between different venues, events, activities, put the car on show, and enjoy filming and shooting these videos for you guys. So it all kind of balances out at the end of the day. The GT3 has done just better, 18.4 miles per gallon ahead of the 17.3, 4,000 miles, 988 litres, 1,400 pounds in just over a month. Oh goodness me. So yes, if you bought a much more efficient practical car, you would spend an awful lot less money on fuel, and I would probably recommend that. That's the not so fun bit. Let's get on the move though, go for a little drive, keep the car rolling as it should. That's the whole point of the Fuel for Thought videos, right? To go for a little drive and have a bit of a discussion about them. So it is a very funny sensation driving left-hand drive car in England. It's definitely going to take me some getting used to before I fully know what I'm doing. Now, I'm not going to lie, obviously these two cars, actually maybe not quite so much. When I bought the AMG GT R, I was aware that I would do a lot of miles with it, but I don't think I knew how many it would be. But the car is so supremely usable, as well as being really cool for these videos. I think you guys are loving all the different things I'm shooting with them. I'm certainly massively enjoying driving it, particularly now with the Rentec downpipe, where it just sounds absolutely mental, bonkers crazy. Yeah, there we go. Please measure oil level. We can push that away for the moment. This car, I didn't think I would drive so much. Obviously the track days are still ahead of it. Those will come in future. The weather today, by the way, bringing the cyclists out, but it is crazy. The sun just pops out between a cloud, and the next thing you know, you're standing in the sunshine with rain falling. Welcome to London in April, hey. So I knew I would do track days and things, but I didn't think it would add up quite so fast. But obviously we took this car and the GTR down to Monaco for top marks, to Cars and Coffee Brescia, and that kind of drive through the Alps and the like brings up the miles very, very quickly. But let's now break into some of the other costs. So I talked a little bit about the GTR and the GT3 and their purchase prices when I compared the two cars directly to one another, because they were basically spot on. The GTR was £159,000, and this car bought in euros, translated back at the current exchange rate, was about 159,500. Now, I did spec some more options on this car versus the GTR, but near enough the same money, which is quite an interesting comparison then between them if you haven't already seen that video. So you have to think a bit about depreciation. On the market right now, GT3s are trading at roughly list, probably not if you do this mileage. AMG GTRs at very low mileage are actually still trading at a small premium. If you do 10,000 miles in it, you probably lose a lot. So I'm very aware of that in my calculations before taking delivery of a car and how it's going to, end up. And obviously, behind cars is the purchasing decision. The AMG GTR, I actually did some finance on to make the purchase more, I suppose, attainable, approachable, with my money tied up in some of the other cars I own, and deposits being aware of deposits for future cars that you probably know about that are coming and other things. So I had to calculate all of this, and then you have to be aware of your finance rate, whether it's 4, 5, 6%, and what that's going to add up to be, and that is very different from case to case. So it would be impossible for me to give you an exact number, but loosely speaking, if you're buying a car for 160 grand and you put a quarter of the value in, 40 grand, you're financing maybe an 80 grand balloon at the end and 40 grand that you're paying off along the way. So you've got payments of, in pounds, about 1,500 a month. So that is roughly where it comes in on both cars when you work it out at the end of the day. Servicing on them. Servicing on these kind of cars, daily driving them, means you're going to hit that service point sooner. In both cases, I think it's about 20,000 kilometers that they need their first service. So the AMG GTR is about to get there. It's going to be there very soon, actually. And then the GT3 will take quite a lot longer. But when they do, it's going to be roughly £1,000, €1,000 each time. So if I do that every 6 months, that adds up very, very fast. Then we can move on to talk about tyres. Tyre cost is relevant. The Michelin Sport Cup 2s are worn by both cars, actually. Tyres that are good for the track and driving on sticky driving on nice country roads. Not so much for poodling around the city. This is a totally impractical car for this kind of drive, gently and slow around a city centre. That's a whole different topic. But the tyres are maybe £1,200, £1,300 a time, and they won't last forever. Obviously, I've also got winter tyres, the Pirelli Stotto Zeros that I drove on the AMG GTR. So that's another consideration, another just over £1,000 to have those in the garage. Then you get to insurance. Insurance is an interesting one because this, again, varies massively from person to person. I've got a very good history and track record, and obviously I park my cars securely and look after them a lot. And I built up my relationship with my insurer and with the broker that I use. So that means it's roughly between these two, £2,000 per year per car. For a pretty good coverage policy, and I think that's quite important, especially with the kind of usage that I have out of these cars. You could spend more depending on the track days you do, depending on the mileage as well is a relevant factor. It goes up the more mileage you intend to do with the car, the more drivers. Obviously, lots of other guys drive my cars, so it's a big thanks to my insurer actually that it's possible to do that. So storage, another part of this, storing the cars. In central London, I actually pay for a number of parking spaces. I have a couple in the basement underneath my apartment building that you've seen before. I also have a couple in the storage, the long-term storage that I use to park up the cars. So I have 2 in my garage, 3 in storage, and I also have 2 in my garage in Frankfurt. So I'm paying for 7 parking spaces. Frankfurt is a lot cheaper than London, you won't be surprised to hear at all. A lot cheaper, about 1/3 of the price. London is around £200 to £300 per month per space. So even if the car is off on a road trip, still got to keep the space running, and that's another £3,000 a year. So you can quickly see how this is adding up. The AMG GTR, for example, ignoring the depreciation and financing elements, we've had, well, potentially if I do 20,000 miles in a year, I might do £7,500 of fuel in it. It might do £3,000 for its parking spot, £2,000 for its insurance, 2 services at £1,000 each. It will probably get through 20,000 miles as at least 1.5 sets of tyres. So in terms of total tyre wear, we can talk about £2,000 maybe of tyre wear. So you guys can probably add this up a little bit better than I can while I'm driving. but it's probably a bit over £10,000 in cost to do 20,000 miles. Now 20,000 miles in any car, even if it's a diesel BMW, is still going to have some cost associated. Parking, insurance, servicing, maybe less for the servicing. But if you're driving a 320D, you'll still need new tyres eventually, you'll still need a service at some point, you'll still need to store it, you'll still be spending something on fuel, just maybe not quite so much. Now the LT and GT8 is actually quite interesting because I don't do so much by way of motorway journeys with the cars. Their fuel economy, or average economy, over the time I've owned them is actually quite substantially lower. So the GT8 is now, what is it, a year and 4 months old. Since I picked it up, a year and 3.5 months since I showed it at the Autosport show in Birmingham. Since then it's done about 5,600 miles. It's averaging 15.8 miles per gallon in total, but obviously the way the mileage gets brought down on average is by doing motorway runs, and it's not done quite so many motorway runs. It's done some truck journeys to Italy, to Sardinia, up to Scotland and that kind of thing. The LT, unsurprisingly, it's I think you could say fuel economy is in some way linked to power, and the more powerful a car is, the less well it's going to do. The LT's running count is 13.4 miles per gallon, which is seriously painful to think about. It's not exactly the best number in the world, and that is over. It's done 10,500 miles now, coming up, what is it, 3 months short of 2 years old, which is, I guess that time's just flown by. It feels like yesterday that I literally picked it up, but completely not. So nearly 2 years old on the LT. For comparison, by the way, the Focus RS has done 28 miles per gallon over my ownership. The blue one, which is about to be sold because the red and my Heritage Edition are literally around the corner. So here's a bit about the costs. I'm thinking for future cars, the Ford GT, the Ford GT's claimed fuel economy is pretty horrendous, and I know tons of you at the moment are actually asking me about the GT, and I am going to give you an update about that very, very soon. I promise. Watch this space. There is some news to come about the car. Now, while I'm actually driving in the GT3, just to touch on other elements of daily driving a supercar, there are cars that are appropriate for this and there are cars that are not. This is not. These seats are way too straight. The harnesses and the buckle between your legs is immensely frustrating. There are clangs and weird noises galore that come out of this car. There is a cage right behind me which is almost impossible for squeezing luggage through. If you want to put anything more than you can fit in just the front of the car, it's an absolute nightmare. The gearbox is great. You do have a lift system, so you can get over bumps at the front. You can just slide it straight across to the left if you want to go manual, you know, do a bit of this and have a bit of fun. And the shift noise is wonderful when you do. But obviously for driving around like London, I'm not trying to, like this around London, I'm not trying to be a hero of any sorts. You know, this is not the kind of drive to be making noise and being antisocial in any way. There's no point at all. It's a smooth drive, but it's not appropriate for this environment. I think when you might have seen my video where I drove a manual GT3 at Ascari circuit in Spain, I decided and concluded at the end that whether you had a manual GT3 or a paddle shift PDK GT3, you'd be very happy with your choice. Both of them are fantastic setups, but the reality is the car is not necessarily the best car for daily driving, which is where often the PDK is useful. I'm going to use it that way because I'm just weird and strange in that respect, but for most people, if it's a pure fun car, then maybe you go manual. I mean, for driving the Nordschleife, don't get me wrong, I like the PDK for that as well. Still, same conclusion at the end of the day. So what else can I tell you about the costs of running these cars? Well, I think that's probably most of it. I'm just going to pull over for a second here, pop the car into park, and park up for a moment. There we go. Switched off, and just while we are here, let's have one last little glimpse. Is there anything I have forgotten to tell you? Yes, I suppose this is quite relevant as well. You need to think about the costs if anything goes wrong. Daily driving a supercar, you know, the parts cost more. The labour rate at dealerships costs more. So if, let's say, you bash the front, it's going to be a lot more painful, especially if it's a carbon fibre car like the McLaren. So the GT R and the GT3 fit into this performance price bracket where, to me at this stage, it feels more like I can use them for this purpose, whereas if they were hugely more expensive, I might be pushing it a little bit further. This car actually has that lower plastic front splitter, which is actually quite cheap to change. It's about £250, 300 euros, that kind of thing. But I think, yeah, I think that's pretty much all bases covered. about the costs of daily driving a supercar. So those of you who have wondered, you now know roughly how much I've spent in a disturbingly short time driving the AMG GT R and the 911 GT3, but this is not the end. These cars are going to be used plenty more, because not only is it fun, but I think it also makes cool videos that you guys can watch and enjoy as well. So thank you very much, as always, for joining me for the FFT today. If there's anything else you'd like to know about, or any topics we can talk in more detail about, please do by all means pop your questions down below. If there are any other comments or questions relating to the costs, I'll do my best to answer your comments. So again, pop them down below and we'll see what we can do. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I appreciate your support as always. It's very, very, very much appreciated, and I will catch up with you again next time. Cheers.